Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we're discussing some scenarios that we are often asked about by incoming law students. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking about some scenarios that people often ask about if they're incoming law students. Well, first off, I think the biggest one we get is, what should I do to prepare? Whether that's academically or logistically. Well, conveniently, we have several other recent podcasts on those topics, so I would recommend that you go listen to them.
Yep, because there are things to do in all those categories to get
exactly.
ready.
And, they are worthy of their own several podcasts worth, so we're not going to talk about them right now. If you don't know what to do to prepare, go and listen to the podcast that we will link to in the show notes. Next question.
Yes. I'm an incoming law student who was a first-generation college and now law student. What should I do to ensure I am not at a disadvantage compared to people who have lawyers in their family?
Well, Lee, I'm not sure this is a fair question for you, given that both of your parents are attorneys, and so you probably had a few advantages there, I would imagine.
I did, 100%. I had the safe space to ask questions, for sure.
And they might actually have useful information for you.
That's true. They actually had some useful answers, which is also true.
Yeah, I think, this is tough for people who, don't necessarily have that connection to people who care about them, that they can ask questions. But, I think it's not insurmountable, particularly for someone who is a first generation college student. Well, you've gotten through college. You clearly did pretty well because you've been admitted to law school. So, I think looking at what worked for you in college and then trying to sort of replicate that in the law school environment is a great place to start. So, that might be relevant affinity groups that you can contact in advance or, early on in your law school career. Really reach out to them. They may also be reaching out to you because they are there for you. And a lot of those groups are really fantastic.
Yeah, they really are. And they have, they help you find mentors or get additional resources or help. There's programming, there's lectures, there's their outline banks. You name it. These groups are really there to give you that community, but also kind of help you make sure that you're set up for success.
Yeah, definitely. I think you can look for professors or maybe administrators who might be allies or good sources. You're going to need people kind of, on the inside in a way, in case you run into any problems or you have any situations that you need help with and that kind of thing. Usually there's kind of a, underground network of understanding of like, oh yeah, this person is really helpful or useful to talk to, or this professor is very open if you go and talk to them about whatever. So part of that is you want to learn as much as you can kind of about what you're getting into. Unfortunately, there probably are professors and things on the other side of that as well that maybe are not so useful or helpful to people who might not be kind of the most typical law students. So I think, that information is typically out there. But I think anything you can kind of figure out to make yourself just feel more comfortable and more confident can be great.
I think academic support offices, if your school has one, can also be an underutilized resource, especially if you're looking for a place that feels safe to ask a lot of questions, especially about the process of law school, how to succeed academically, making sure that you know how to get access to past exams. Those offices can be really, really great resources. Of course, not all of them are run in the same way, and some may have reputations of being more helpful than others. But the ones that have really wonderful professors can be really life-changing for some law students. So I think that's another place at school that you want to try and find some mentors, some people who will meet with you to answer questions. I think there's just a lot to be learned from those professors that do that sort of work.
Yeah, and you might also have opportunities for peer tutoring or things like that, again, depending on the school, like some of them have really fantastic programs and maybe otherwise not so much. But, it's at least looking into And trying to find somebody that you feel like you connect with and that you can trust and that you can open up to and get your questions answered.
Yeah. One other thing that you want to make sure that you are keeping an eye out for is sometimes there even can be some pre-orientation, either workshops or meet and greets or some sort of event that you might be invited to, either hosted by one of these affinity groups, maybe hosted by academic support. And just make sure you're checking all of your emails and reading all of your documents that are mailed to you so you can track when this stuff happens. Because I know it's like a deluge of stuff that comes through sometimes, but you want to make sure that if there's something you want to attend, that you know about it in plenty of time so you can plan to attend.
Definitely. And if you get to school and you find out, you don't have the support that you need, you can always start or expand upon existing programming, starting a new student group or reactivating one that maybe, isn't as active as you might like it to be is always an option, even as a 1L.
Absolutely. And make sure you go to your school and ask for the resources you need to provide the programming that you think the students need, because the worst thing they'll say is no.
Right. I mean, the reality is, at least at my school, every student group got a certain budget just kind of as a matter of course, and we could pretty much spend it on whatever we wanted. So that is a great incentive to get involved and then figure out what you want and then let your school pay for it.
Yep. All right. Another question. I'm a neurodivergent incoming law student or someone with learning differences. What can I do to set myself up for success?
Well, this is definitely something that is very, very, very common. The first thing you've got to kind of look at is again, what are the resources that your school has? And some of them are better or worse, but you want to make sure that you've reached out and, gotten connected with, I believe the schools are all required actually to have an office that handles this type of thing under federal law. So, there will be some type of office of, whatever they call it at that particular place. But you want to make sure that you have reached out to them as early as possible. If you are going to need accommodations, that you understand that process, you know what you need to do. If you need to get an assessment or something, that you've done that as soon as possible. And unfortunately, all this stuff can take time and it can take money. But you want to make sure that you do it as soon as you can so that you're getting the accommodations you need to succeed.
And I think we're not just talking about academic accommodations for exams. We're also talking about, do you qualify to get notes from a note taker in class? Do you need accommodations to be able to sit in the front of the class so it's easier for you to see the professor? Or are you allowed to record lectures in class? There are lots of different accommodations that aren't just about exams, and you want those to be implemented at the beginning of the semester. So that's why it does take a little bit of early legwork to make sure all of that is in place. I think academic support offices, again, can be helpful with this too if you're struggling navigating the connections between the law school and sometimes disability services offices, or whatever your school calls that department, can serve like a larger university. So there are folks at your law school, between the dean's office, between probably academic support, that can help you make sure you're talking to the people you need to speak to. So hopefully you don't get those accommodations well into the semester if you need them throughout the semester.
That's a very good point. And I also think what we see sometimes is people who maybe have struggled a little bit with something in the past, ADHD and that type of thing is pretty common. So maybe you struggled with this in previous educational experiences, but they find out once they get to law school and kind of the workload is ramped up that this is becoming more and more of an issue. So if you are somebody who maybe was diagnosed in a previous, time frame, but you haven't actually gotten accommodations, it's something to just kind of keep an eye on and think about. Because we do often see that the pressure, when it ramps up, can cause people who haven't, have managed to kind of handle it on their own, not to be able to do that anymore. And sometimes that can take quite a while to realize and get, a new diagnosis and get accommodations. And, you don't want to dig yourself a hole, basically, if you don't need to do that.
And students also sometimes find that having a tutor, whether it be somebody through the school, whether it be someone who works for our team, who's able to customize their study recommendations to their own individual needs, can be very helpful. Sometimes the advice you're going to get the more generic advice you're going to get, like at an outlining workshop or at like a how to study exams lecture, that may not resonate with you because that's not how your brain works, or you get extended time and you're not sure exactly what to do with that extended time. So you want to, utilize all the resources that you have to get the right support in place, so you can, compete on this playing field, which should be hopefully leveled by the accommodations, but you also want to make sure that you know how best to utilize them to find success.
Definitely, because there are just kind of patterns, of ways of writing and things that we've seen a lot. And sometimes professors will even recognize this and kind of, if they're surprised by your performance on an exam or something, kind of reach out and say, hey, have you ever considered that like maybe you have this issue? Because there are definitely patterns that we can see that, there are many ways to work on, but there are certain things that commonly arise.
Yeah. Okay. I am excited about parts of law school, but terrified about others. Is this normal?
Well, I would say it's very common, as my therapist was fond of saying, what is normal anyway? But I do think this is really common. And, I don't think it's unreasonable. I think there are things that you probably will end up liking a lot and other things you might not like that much. I don't know your experience, Lee, but there definitely were things I was really excited about. And then things where I'm like, oh, this is going to be terrible. Like, I really don't want to do this.
Yeah. I think that that's true. I think going back to school can be a little intimidating, especially if you've taken a break. I think there's always that mixture of excitement and a little intimidation. And getting back into the academic swing of things, especially if you've taken a break and been working, can be its own challenge. If you're going to sit in one spot and just read things for hours and hours on end, and if that's not what you were doing at your day job, that's going to be a big shift. But life is all a mixed bag, right? And so there are going to be great parts of it. There are going to be not so great parts of it. I think that you just want to make sure that the parts that you are a little more, worried about or terrified, that you come at them with a growth mindset and then try and get the support that you need to manage it. I think that's really all you can do.
Right. I think also trying to be a little bit open-minded. I mean, certainly the classes that I thought I was really excited to take were not necessarily classes that I ended up finding remotely interesting. So I think in some ways you can't really know until you're in it. I was like, oh, con law, it's going to be so great. And I had a terrible con law experience. So,
Yeah. And some professors have these really intimidating reputations. And one of my favorite professors, who I thought was incredibly kind, was intimidating in the classroom, and he was incredibly kind and approachable outside the classroom. And I found him to be a really great mentor. So sometimes you also just can't rely on the reputation of some of these experiences because the reality could be totally different.
Yeah, I think that's a great point on professors. They often are very intimidating in the classroom, but completely different. And, they did go typically into teaching because they like students and they like working with students. I mean, some of them just want to write law review articles, but most of them, have some interest in teaching.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great reason to go to office hours, just to get to see your professor in a different way, and hopefully, build a relationship with them so that when they do cold call you, you're not, literally shaking in your boots.
True. Okay, next up, I'm pretty sure I am not smart enough for law school. Will this be a disaster?
Well, again, let's go back to the growth mindset. It's
Right?
not about being smart enough or not smart enough. They let you in. There's probably a reason that someone decided that you were smart enough to do this. Always keep that in mind.
True.
If you were admitted to law school, I think you are, basically smart enough for law school. That's kind of a, recursive way of looking at it. But you wouldn't be there if they hadn't decided. And, the admissions people have a pretty clear idea of who's going to be able to do this. So I think this is, it's a tempting thing to kind of psych yourself out about. Mm-hmm. But I'm just not sure it's really that helpful.
No. The reality is that law school is hard for just about everybody in one way or the other.
Right.
So you kind of have to go in, and if you go in saying like, well, what if I'm not smart enough? And then you have your first couple of weeks of class and you're like, this is really hard.
I must not be
I'm just
smart
like,
enough.
I must not be smart enough. That's just not the reality. The reality is this is a hard thing to do. This is a hard thing to learn. And you just have to keep working at it. It's a learned skill, and know that no matter, what your thoughts are on your own individual intelligence, it's really about putting in the work and getting better at this craft of both going to law school and being a lawyer. And it's going to be hard, and that's okay. It's designed to be hard. If it was easy, everybody would do it. It's not easy. It's hard.
Right.
So it's designed that way.
Right, exactly. If it's not hard, you're probably missing something because,
Yeah.
At a minimum, it's a lot of work.
Yes.
Particularly if you actually read your cases. I mean, even if you don't read the cases and try to learn everything from an outline, we're still talking about a lot of volume of material.
Yeah.
And, the process of like taking that material and being able to apply it on an exam and write under time pressure and all these things, they're not easy. So I don't think, kind of saying, oh, I'm just not smart enough for this, or that person's so smart, or there's so much, people in class, people often think like, oh, that person's so much smarter than I am. Like they always sound like they know what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. But I think it's fair to say when grades finally come out, like, you often realize that the people who are kind of at the top are not the people who sound like they're really smart in class. It's that person sitting in the back who doesn't even appear to be paying attention, who's actually like, the stealth gunner, as they say.
Right. It's true. All right. A flip side of this coin is I'm going to a school where I'm above the median for LSAT and GPA. This is going to be a cakewalk, right?
I do not think that is a helpful attitude to go into law school with. And I know people do often think that. There's a pretty weak correlation between LSAT and GPA and grades. I'm not saying there's none, but it's pretty weak. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's, the equivalent of like getting a great SAT score and then like going to some college that nobody's ever heard of or something. And then you're like, oh, this is so easy. Because like we said, law school is hard.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is your effort. So if, you're coming in with like a great setup to perform well, but then you don't do any work, you're probably not going to perform that well. That's just the reality.
And if you are, getting a scholarship and, you can't just assume, especially if that scholarship is like GPA dependent, it's a mistake to just assume, well, I got in on this academic scholarship, I'm just going to be able to keep it and knock it out of the park. We talk to people all the time who are at risk of losing their academic scholarships because they're not performing as they want to. That's why they hire us to try and help them boost their GPA to keep that money. So it's not a guarantee. I think you should feel confident that you are well qualified to be where you are. And if you do the work and you focus, that you should be able to be competitive. But that's just about everyone in your class.
Right.
So,
I mean, the reality is, in any given law school, the actual range of LSAT and GPA is very narrow.
Yeah.
So, it's not like you've got people who've got like a 130 and a 180 and they're all competing for the same grades. Like that's just, it's usually like a few points basically.
Yeah.
That's like the bulk of the range.
Yeah.
So you're not like massively above average, basically, probably.
Not to mention the fact that the way the curve is designed, it's very competitive to get in the rarefied air of those top scores.
Right. There aren't
many.
many.
It just really is. There aren't many. So, sure, you might have, be above the median, but you're still going to be duking it out with people of similar credentials to try and get to the rarefied air of those kind of B plus A minus A's. And that's not easy to do. You have to distinguish yourself from other people who are also going to be focused and also going to work hard. So the reality is, I think you just need to worry about yourself and do the best that you can, and just be happy you got into school and feel like you are going to be successful if you put in the work.
Exactly. I think if you don't put in the work, and it's pretty unlikely that you're going to consistently be at the top of the curve. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Yep.
Because there are a lot of people, and this kind of relates to our next question, which is, I know I want to transfer. How can I set myself up to do this? Well, the answer is you should get really good grades.
Yeah.
And
it's true. Get really good grades and build relationships with the professors so they can write you really great letters of recommendation.
Yeah.
I think those are kind of the two things.
Right. And, the reality is in any school that's not like a very, very top school, there will be a lot of people who come in thinking like, oh, I might transfer out of here. And so those people are going to be competing to get the grades that they need to do that.
Yep.
So, grades are definitely number one. And then number two, as you said, is really building those relationships, going to office hours, making sure your professor knows who you are so that when you need them to write you a letter of recommendation, it says something more than Lee got an A in my class.
Right. Exactly. Which is nice, but that's not oftentimes what you are looking for.
Right. As you can see from the transcript, Lee received an A.
Right. I never really spoke to her, but she got an A.
Right. So, you want that person to be like, this person was engaging in class. They were a pleasure to have. They came and, interacted with me in office hours. They seem like they're interested. Like, I respect their intellectual capacity, and they got an A in my class.
Right. I also think it's important, even if you want to explore transferring, that you don't not engage with the school that you're in.
Right.
There are many reasons you might decide not to transfer, or your transfer opportunities don't pan out. But if you want to be on the law review, or want to be on like a moot court board, or want to be an officer of an affinity group, like, you don't necessarily want to say, well, I'm not going to do all of these things because I might transfer. Because if you don't transfer, then you're kind of a 2L that doesn't have any of these roles that you would want if you wanted to distinguish yourself academically at that school. So I think that it is important to kind of run these kind of like parallel tracks, explore the transfer track, but also continue to invest in the community that you're a part of.
Oh, definitely. Because you don't want to be that person who like doesn't have any friends at the end of their first year because you were like so sure that you're going to transfer and then you didn't. And now you're like, oh, I'm a 2L and everyone already has their friend group and like, oh, that sucks.
Right.
I think you're going to be happier if you commit fully to whatever experience you're having at that moment. And then if the opportunity presents itself, you can make your decision based on, what you would be giving up versus what you would be gaining. And there will be pros and cons. And you may have the opportunity to transfer somewhere else and then decide not to do it because you've set yourself up for like a very nice, way of life and experience in your current law school.
Right. Let's say you're on the law review or this or that.
And they give you more money.
Right. Or they give you more money. So there are lots of reasons why you may not want to transfer. Yeah. So I think it's just important to remember that you don't exactly know what the next steps will be.
Yeah. And if you do want to transfer, get good grades. Done.
Yep, exactly. Okay, I'm not sure I want to be a lawyer, but law school seems like a better option than working in a coffee shop. Is this a good idea? Is it too late to back out?
Well, this is a hard question. It's not too late to back out. Certainly, if you have not shown up to orientation, you can definitely back out, and that would be a great time to do it because I think once you show up, if you ever reapply, even if you do drop out, you have to tell them that you started. So don't start, basically, if you are pretty sure you don't want to do this. You can, if you're not sure, I think you can often negotiate, starting a year later or something like that. Schools tend to be pretty flexible about holding you a spot. I don't know, Lee, what do you think about this?
I think it's a good idea to just really sit with this decision before it's time to start. Right. We talk about students writing the letters to themselves about why they want to set this goal, why they want to do this. It is a lot of money and time. And unless you're on a full ride, it's still your time, and a year to 3 years of your life, to give it a shot. I really think if you can't fully show up and give it some good effort, I would delay until you can figure out what you want to do. It just is a lot to take on if you really don't want to be there.
Yeah. If you're really not sure, I think there's an argument for taking a year to think about it, maybe do some pro bono work, maybe work even in a law environment, kind of see what that's like. Because if you get a job in a law firm, as a paralegal or a secretary or something, and you absolutely hate it, then no, you should not go to law school.
Right. Or even take our Start Law School Right course.
True.
And go through that. And if you're like, I don't want to listen to lectures like that. Well, that's
I don't want to
what
read
you're going
these
to
things.
do. Yeah, I don't want to read these cases. I don't want to do this. This writing doesn't feel good to me. That's like a little nibble of what you're going to get in law school. I think that's a really good way to test the water without investing as much time, energy, and money into it. But I think that life is not a race. If you can slow down and make a more deliberate decision, that might be the best call.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's way better to work as a barista where at least you're getting paid something over the course of a year and you have some time and, you can live your life. Particularly, I think if you're coming straight out of undergrad and you've never really had a job, you've never been like, showing up to work every single day, like 5 days a week. I mean, after you do that for a year, going back to school might seem like a really great idea.
It's true. Yeah. It might really shift your focus.
You might be more motivated after having a like minimum wage job that you had to actually go to every day.
Yes.
But also you might find that you really like interacting with people and, doing whatever it is that you're doing. So, I sometimes think about jobs I had before I went to grad school or law school, and I was just like, man, I probably should have stayed there. Like,
Yeah.
I could have saved myself a lot of money.
Or sometimes I think about these jobs and I'm like, why did I think a corporate law firm job was going to be any different than the other big corporate jobs that I didn't like?
Yeah.
So sometimes it is important to think about, what lessons you've learned by being out in the real world a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the year between I graduated early from undergrad and the year between that and the first year I went to grad school, not for law school, I had this temp job and I was working at like the Nestle corporate headquarters in the travel and event planning section. And like, they really wanted me to stay there. And I think about, man, if I had done that, like I would have had probably like a really great career, like leading like the travel department. I'd be flying all over the world, staying in like first class, everything. And I wouldn't have spent like God knows how much money on these 2 grad school experiences.
True.
But, whatever.
Whatever.
I can't turn back time.
Water under the bridge now. Okay. I don't want to work at a law firm and I'm paying full price for law school. Is this a terrible idea?
Well, this is one where I think you've really got to run the numbers and be realistic and understand in a real way what your job prospects are going to look like from the school that you're going to. And if you are going to attend a school where most people end up going into big law at the end of it, I think you really have to be realistic that you are also very highly likely to end up in that firm, at least for a while. And a lot of that's just down to the economics. If you're paying full price, that is probably going to be at least $200,000 of loan debt. And how in the world do you pay that back?
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to do public interest work, you could learn about any sort of loan forgiveness program. I mean, you want to just be really clear about all of your options, but sitting down and really understanding what these loans mean for your longer term life planning is critical. I think you really need to just own the choice. Just make sure you're fully educated about it. And I think most of us, including myself, I did not sit down and fully understand exactly what all these loans were and what these different interest rates meant and what the different types of loans were. It's like you get your packet, you say thanks for the free money, and you roll on out.
Right.
Like it's just, I think I didn't do that as much as I could have. And I think that were I to do it again, luckily, I did get some money from the school, and I did get money for being an editor on the law review, and I mean, I had like all of these kind of paths to lighten that load, but I definitely didn't do the due diligence that I would tell somebody else to do in my place.
Right, and now, I mean, as opposed to a while ago, like graduate student loans are actually pretty expensive. They're not like undergraduate loans are pretty heavily subsidized by the government, but graduate students, they're kind of like, you know what, you're going to be a lawyer, like you can pay this back.
Yeah.
And there are ways that you can probably not have to pay it all back in the end if you're doing public interest type things, but you want to really understand the requirements of those and make sure that whatever you're thinking of doing is going to fall into the right categories because, nobody is that eager to just give you money back.
Right.
So you've really got to make sure that you have checked all the boxes and that you have done everything and documented everything in case you ever need, because a lot of this goes on for 10 or 20 years. And, can you prove what you were doing 10 years ago? Like you're going to need to possibly do that. So I think you just have to be really realistic about what you're getting into here.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And also really understand that like starting salaries as lawyers have a bimodal distribution. And if you don't understand what that means, I will link to a post we did a very long time ago that explains it with charts and graphs. But basically the median that gets reported is not a number that has any meaning. You either make, around 60-ish or you make like 100 and something. There's very little in the middle. So just be aware of what that means.
Yeah. Oh, the realities of money. It's tough. It's tough.
It is. And I think it's really hard to understand like how it will impact your life. I mean, even things like getting a mortgage and that kind of thing, like all of this is impacted by having student loan debt. That's just the reality.
Yep, it is. Okay, last but not least, am I going to hate all of my classmates? This is like straight out of some sort of like law school movie or TV show or book.
Totally. I mean, hopefully not. I don't know.
Hopefully not. I don't know. I mean, I think you're probably going to find your crew, your community, right? I mean, it's you might have to work for it. It might not be the first people that you meet are going to be the people that you're still friends with. But I'm sure that you're going to find your community in law school. They're going to be probably like-minded people with similar interests or passions.
I mean, Lee and I went to law school. You want to hang out with us, right?
Totally. We like to hang out with each other.
No, I mean, I think this is, I think the reality is like law school is an educational experience that may not necessarily attract like all of the nicest people in the world. And depending on the school, you may or may not like a lot of these people, and there may or may not be different vibes at different schools. But I do think it's fair to say there's almost always someone that you can find that you will not hate and you don't mind hanging out with and might actually even become a good friend.
Yep, I think that's true. Well, any final thoughts for those incoming 1Ls who have a long worry list?
Well, I think that's normal. It's probably, I mean, you are going to law school. You're probably someone who likes to do like risk analysis and probably has a negativity bias because most lawyers do. But, I think just try to sort of take the good with the bad and be open to the experience and keep an eye out for like the good parts of the experience and not overly focus on the negative ones would be my best advice.
Yeah, I think I would add to that to remember that it is a privilege to be able to do this, to, take years to study this, to find your place in the legal profession, maybe be that resource to navigate the legal profession for somebody who isn't able to do it on their own. And I think there is meaning in that. I think a long time ago, I wrote a blog post about how the world needs good lawyers. And I still do believe that. And so, just remember that there's a lot of really important stuff happening at a law school, that there are a lot of people who might make the world a better place. Maybe some people who won't make the world a better place, but there are other people who are going to try and make the world a better place. And I think that that's kind of exciting and you could be one of them. I think there's a little bit of a like mushy part of this that I think gets lost sometimes in the logistics, that it can be kind of exciting to take this on. Lawyers can do really amazing things.
That is very true.
All right. Before we finish up, we want to take a second to let you know that you can check out our Stars Law School Right course for new incoming law students on our website. It's an on-demand course, and it includes feedback from one of our awesome tutors. And you can check it out and feel free to contact us if you have any questions. It's done at your convenience, so you can fit it in around packing to move to law school. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Alison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.